Today, this grid isn't decoration, it's the distance between two people, two transfers, one barrier, and a lot of blue. Stay tuned to see it all happen. For this week's Art Heart Academy prompt, it was grid. I didn't want the grid to feel like something I slapped on at the end, just so I could say, look, technically I follow directions. I wanted the grid to matter. So for this piece, I started thinking about the grid as a veil or a boundary or some kind of invisible wall between two people who are close enough to see each other, but not close enough to reach each other. Maybe they're separated by time, maybe by space or loss, maybe by something they can't even name. Just some light craft content here. So I start with the grid itself. It's not perfectly measured. Uh, I did use a ruler, but I didn't treat it like I was, making drafting blueprints for a federal building. The lines are a little uneven, and honestly, I like that because the perfect grid would feel too mechanical. I wanted something slightly compressed and stretched in places, almost like the image is being pulled or distorted. I really like this idea of using a cobalt blue over this plate because I've been clearly in a blue phase lately. And at some point, it stops being a color choice. It becomes a personal weather system. So I'm going to spread the thin layer of cobalt blue. And one thing is I don't want it just to be plain blue either. So I'm going to spray water onto the wet paint. And this is going to break it up and it creates more texture rather than leaving it as one flat solid layer. And I have to let it dry completely. One of my favorite things about gel printing is that sometimes the plate quietly makes a better decision than I did or I would. So as this layer dried, some of the blue paint got caught in some of the squares of the grid in a way I hadn't planned at all. Some stayed more open, some held onto the cobalt, some developed this almost stained glass texture. It wasn't part of the strategy, but I'm absolutely willing to accept credit for it emotionally. At this point, I did keep the image transfer protected because I didn't want the woman's face becoming blotchy or broken up by the later layers. For this concept to work, she needed to feel present but partially hidden behind the grid. This light blue is, embedding her into this piece, like she's part of that memory of the distance. And thinking about the grid less as a pattern and more as this dividing force. It's not just sitting there, it's doing something. It's interrupting the space between two people. If that sounds dramatic, good. Sometimes a grid deserves a little drama. I mixed up a little bit of the colors of parchment and gold dripped on the plate, and I want the color to be uneven, little rougher patches and variations in texture, so that way it feels more alive than a perfectly blended color. The gold will add a little shimmer, but not in that cheerful birthday card way. It's more like an old photograph, old wallpaper, an old memory, a little worn, a little beautiful, a little haunted, which coincidentally is also how I feel staying up too late editing videos. I did add texture because I didn't want the background to feel clean or polished. It needed some grit. I'm going to use gold here as the backup so that way the white doesn't come through on the actual paper that I use. I don't want it to be have white blotches in it. I love being able to flip the gel over just to get an idea of how everything's looking. You can see the woman is looking down from that upper right hand corner or quadrant, and I'm going to put the man, the counterpart, on the front, looking up at her from the lower left. Ultimately, now to pull this after everything's going to be dry, I like to use my matte acrylic medium for these layered pulls. It's just one of my most reliable tools because it dries clear and helps bring up all of those layers without adding, this new opaque color behind it. And so I put on a liberal portion here, but I want it to be, uniformly applied across the entire plate. The paper I want to pull this with is the wet strengthened tissue paper because that paper is just one of my go-to materials. It's really thin and delicate looking, but it's so much stronger than it seems. So I press it down carefully with my hands with the palm of my hand, and I want to make sure to try to remove as many of the bubbles as possible, especially around the figure, because that face is what matters, not the edges so much. But if it tears or bubbles right across the image, that whole emotional concept is suddenly becoming less longing and more like a, a printer error. I did place my heavy book on top and let it set. The book's job simple, be heavy, and don't ask questions there, just to help it all come into contact and let it fully dry. For delicate or layered pulls, I usually prefer removing the plate from the paper instead of yanking the paper from the plate. It gives me a little more control, and that control is helpful when the entire piece is held together by paint, tissue paper, and optimism. Now, this pull came up really nicely. You can see the grid, you can see the blue texture, you can see the shimmer. Most importantly, you can see that the woman feels like she's behind something, and that's exactly what I was going for. She's visible, but not fully accessible here. I did clean the residual grid from the plate using baby oil and a paper towel. I didn't record it because it's mostly me just rubbing the gel plate and wondering why I chose something that's going to require so much cleanup. One thing, remember that this process is going to be reversed. Everything is reverses. So the area that's originally going to appear in the lower left has to be on the opposite side of the plate. This is the part where my brain always briefly opens up the support ticket. It knows it reverses. I understand that it reverses. It's still every time I have to stand there and think mentally that the entire universe is around this reversal. Once I figured out the placement, I was ready to add the second figure. For this man, I want him to appear on the opposite side of the grid. That means I need to make sure that his image has enough opacity behind it that the grid doesn't go through and pierce him. Because otherwise, if he's too transparent, it's going to run straight through his face, and suddenly he wouldn't be separated by the boundary. He'd be skewered by it. Different mood altogether. Very different mood altogether. Um, so I'm going to have to paint behind his image to block that grid and to create that separation that I'm ultimately going to go for. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm putting on it's like a parchment white color. It's nothing glamorous. I will take a paper towel and just kind of clean up the edges around him, and I didn't record that. You can see where I've kind of cleaned up to almost give him a halo effect in that sense. I think a lot of my art is kind of like this. It's 5% inspiration and 95% trying not to ruin the thing that you liked 5 minutes ago. What I'm going to do to pull off the layer of this man is, once again, my good friend matte acrylic medium. Um, you have to wait until everything is dry because I didn't want to smear anything, where it wasn't supposed to go. Now, it's not important that the matte acrylic medium is just only on him, because since it's going to dry clear, it's not going to mess anything up. Sorry about that. But again, I do want a fairly thin layer on top of him, and I will be adding the paper that I performed that I made before. That's going to actually be the paper to use to pull this. This is the part where the idea is going to finally become visible, because the two figures will be sharing that same physical surface, but visually they are not in the same space. She's caught behind the grid where he will be outside it. They're close, but they're divided. And that's what I liked about using this grid anyway. It's not just a design element. It becomes the emotional structure of the piece. You have to make sure, though, that, again, that check for bubbles and add the big book and let all the layers bond. Because now it's time for the final pull. Again, I'm going to pull the gel from the paper versus the other way around. This one came off pretty cleanly, and I'm really happy with the results, because you can see the cobalt blue texture. You're going to be able to see that gold and parchment tones. I like that some grid squares have more color than others, and it gives that surface an uneven aged quality. And then you have these two figures that are separated by this grid. They're almost connected and almost touching, almost in that same world, but not quite. And it's the not quite that's really the heart of the play, the piece. And it came off really cleanly. So here is this piece. It's isolated, so you're going to be able to see that shimmer and the layered textures. I'm really proud of this one because the grid became more than what the prompt required. It became the story, or a part of the story, an integral part of the story. And let me know what you see in it. Is it distance or memory? Is it loss or longing? Or did I just make the most emotionally complicated graph paper of my life? Thanks for watching. I will see you next time and have a great day. I will show a quick close up of it in the sketchbook at the very end.